I was at work and there was a nurse I had met from who worked on another unit, and he had come down to the ER to be helping hands and kind of help us task. And when one diabetic notices another diabetic, we kind of just bond, and instantly we both had the same insulin pumps. And I'm like, is it not the greatest thing, this Control-IQ technology? I'm like, it's made my life so much easier. And then his exact words were like, yeah, insulin pumps are cool, but have you heard of islet cells? And I was like, no. Well, I knew what islet cells were. I was an ER nurse, but I was like, no, tell me more. What are you referring to, these islet cells? And he had an islet cell transplant, I think about 10 years prior to our conversation, which was I joined in 2021. And then I became completely obsessed. I did research. I looked up all the facilities that did these islet cell transplants. And then I went on a government website that listed all the clinical trials that are available in the US and internationally. And I found this doctor at the University of Chicago who does them. And I emailed him. And later that day, he was calling me on the phone and we were having a conversation. And then everything just quickly happened shortly after that.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slem, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. Hello and welcome back. This is the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. And today I'm real excited to bring to you a guest, a young lady that I just recently met. Her name is Hannah Gilkey. And she's got an inspiring story she's a recent recipient of an islet cell transplant, and she's here to share her journey. And obviously that started when she was diagnosed at the age of 19, which inspired her to become an ER nurse. And today we talk about the impact of islet cell transplants, learning more about exactly what it is, the process, the criteria that we may have to, or we will have to, kind of follow along, just as she did, in order to be a consideration for this clinically trial procedure. It is not at this point FDA approved, so the only way to get this transplant procedure done, as Hannah did, is to go through a clinical trial. So just learn more about that today. It's a really exciting topic. So her experience was just a year ago. September of 2022 is when she received her beta cells. And today, she gets to share with us the emotional aspects of living with type 1 and that roller coaster that happens, especially after, when she got through with the procedure and she was off of insulin, and the joy she felt and the freedom. And she comes to share that story with us today. And despite a recent setback due to an unrelated infection that she had, Hannah's hope it continues to shine through, and she shares her plans for another beta cell transplant in the near future. So listen to discover the potential of islet cell transplants and learn how you can get involved in advocating for FDA approval as a standard treatment for all of us living with type 1 diabetes. And it's all about knowing that this is an option and being aware of it and being educated and informed. And we're going to be linking all of this here in the show notes to not only connect with Hannah, but the medical team that continues to support her, and ways that you can advocate and spread awareness, and obviously to learn more about whether or not this might be an option for you too. So check out the show notes for all of those details. And I am so excited to share this conversation with you and Hannah and I. It brought up a lot of ideas for myself, and it just forced me to kind of look at some ways that this might be an option for myself. And I think that is the beauty in this, is just to have guests on here that have a story and ways to just kind of come into us and to give us that hope and those choices that we can have access to living with type 1 diabetes. So I hope you enjoy the show, and definitely check out the show notes for all the links and ways to stay connected. And we really, really encourage any sort of feedback or questions. You can contact me through Abundant Health with Melissa, abundanthealthwithmelissa.com/podcast. That is the best way to stay connected with me, or you can reach me on Instagram at Blood Sugar Boss. So again, here's Hannah, and I know you're going to love this episode. Just a reminder that nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your medical professional before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello, we are back in here this week, and I am super excited to talk with Hannah. And she's here to just talk about a topic that it's just amazing. And I'm so thrilled to bring this here to the listeners. And she's going to share her story. So welcome, Hannah. I'm so excited. I can't even talk, right?
No, I'm really excited too. And I'm so honored to be here. So thank you.
Yes, it was definitely meant to be, meeting you and coming across you and hearing your story. And we've had a chance to get to know each other a little bit prior to recording today, and just a true blessing. And I just can't wait to share the hope and something that you have just recently been the word experiment's not a word, but something that you've recently experienced that we're going to sell, and that is pancreatic islet cell transplant. So let's start at the beginning. Let's just share a little bit about yourself personally. And you are an ER nurse. My daughter's a nurse. I always love to plug that because I'm so proud of my daughter, Sarah. And I know what an amazing profession it is and how much dedication it takes. So start maybe with your diagnosis story and where you are now.
Definitely being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes is what made me want to be a nurse. I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for everything that I have gone through. I was diagnosed as an older kid. I was 19. It was just after my freshman year of college. I came home kind of feeling fuzzy and not thinking did the best I could while I was in college. And I really wasn't quite sure why. And so I just kind of threw myself into working all summer. I worked 3 jobs. One of them was I was outside lifeguarding. So obviously I was tired because I was working 3 jobs, and I was thirsty because I was outside in the sun, and I had all this frequent urination, obviously because I was thirsty because I was outside in the sun. So I just had all these little things that I knew were going on, but I just reasoned through everything. And I actually have an aunt who's a physician assistant in the emergency room. And all summer long, she kept telling me, Hannah, you need to go to the doctor. This sounds like diabetes. Hannah, you should go to the doctor. This sounds like diabetes. And I was working 3 jobs. I didn't have time to do that. And the only thing that actually really made me feel good is that summer I started running. And I started running by I was doing 2 miles. And then by the end of the summer, I was running 8 to 10 miles. And it was the only time I ever felt good. So in August, I ended up going to the doctor, and I got directly admitted to the ICU because I was in DKA. And these levels now make more sense as I'm a nurse, and this is something I deal with. But my A1C was 21 at the time.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I've ever heard of a level that high.
Wow. They kept drawing it over and over to check to make sure that was correct. And my fasting glucose was over 900. So I was really, really sick, and I was in denial for a very long time.
Yeah.
But what I remember about my diagnosis is that insulin made me feel better.
It sure does.
And I was so grateful for my nurses and the doctors and being admitted that I didn't have time to be sad, because I just felt so much better once I started having insulin. And that's actually one of the things I always, whenever I have new onset diabetics in the ER with me, there's lots of jobs I do as an ER nurse to take care of these patients. But for me, as something as one diabetic to this brand new diabetic, there are always 3 things that I want to convey to them. And the first thing is insulin's going to make you feel better. Insulin, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's 4 hours from now or 24 hours from now, insulin is going to make you feel better. You're here because you don't feel good. And don't worry, we're going to get some insulin in you and you're going to feel better.
I love that. Yeah.
I always like really push to make sure people know. I'm sorry, I'm going on my little ER tangent.
No,
Um,
it's okay. This is part of the story. I
I
love
always,
that. Yes. And you know something, I'm going to back up real quick.
yeah.
You mentioned running made you feel better. So
Oh, 100%.
isn't that it's kind of ironic when you think about it, because maybe the running was obviously burning some glucose, so maybe it helped you for a short period of time.
Well, my endocrinologist at the time told me that's probably what kept me conscious for so long was the fact that I
Oh,
was going running every day and like bringing my sugar levels
yeah,
down by
yeah.
going for such long runs. At the
Wow.
time, I thought it was a sugar, not a sugar high. I thought it was a runner's high, but
Mm,
turns out it was just me burning off sugar, feeling better.
that is crazy. I'm just picturing all that. That is something.
Yeah.
And the fact that you had energy, that somehow it was kind of a cycle, kind of like a snowball thing, because it made you feel a little bit better. So you wanted more of what was making you feel better, even though fast forward, you realize that insulin is really what's going to make you feel
Yeah.
better. I know we can laugh now. I know at the time it was probably a hot mess.
Was
Just trying to figure it out.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
So that was your way into healthcare, that
correct.
just naturally inspired you. So tell us now, because now this is, how many years ago was that? Just so I can.
15 years ago.
Okay, so
In
15 years
August, it
ago.
was 15 years.
So and for many years, how did you manage pump, MDI? Did you eventually go to CGM?
I have a tandem with a
Okay.
CGM with Dexcom, and I've used
Mm-hmm.
that for many years now.
Okay.
I had like Animus back when Animus was a thing, the colorful pumps when they came out. That
I
was really exciting.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah, that brings back memories. I mean, even though I wasn't on a pump, but I was definitely exposed to them and knew of them. So fast forward, and again, the topic today is talking about a procedure that you had done just about a year ago, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So the date of this recording is going to be, this is late 2023. We're talking late September right now. All that really doesn't matter too much. But so it was September of 2022. So tell us about how you came across this opportunity to get,
I
yeah.
I was at work and there was a nurse I had met from who worked on another unit and he had come down to the ER to be helping hands and kind of help us task. And when one diabetic notices another diabetic, we kind of, just bond and instantly we both had the same insulin pumps. And I'm like, is it
Mm,
not the greatest thing, this control IQ technology? I'm like,
mhm.
it's made my life so much easier. And then his exact words were like, yeah, insulin pumps are cool, but have you heard of islet cells?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no, well, I knew what islet cells were. I was an ER nurse, but I was like,
Mhm.
no, tell me more. What are you referring to, these islet cells? And he had had an islet cell transplant, I think about 10 years prior to our conversation, which was I joined in 2021. And then
Okay.
I became completely obsessed. I did research. I looked up all the facilities that did these islet cell transplants. And then I went on a government website that listed all the clinical trials that are available in the US and internationally.
Mhm.
And I found this doctor at the University of Chicago who does them. And I emailed him. And later that day, he was calling me on the phone and we were having a conversation. And then everything just quickly happened shortly after
Oh,
that.
that's crazy. So for just a minute too, because I know maybe some of the listeners were saying, okay, well, I think I know what beta islet cells are, but could you maybe give us a short description? I mean, you can make it as long as you want. I don't know how long or short it has to be, but just explaining what the islet beta cells are in our system and what happens when we are diagnosed, just that kind of that process that happens.
Sure. So islet cells are a cluster of a bunch of different kinds of cells. And the two cells that we really care about are the beta cells, which are the insulin producing cells in our body, and then the alpha cells, which are the glucagon.
Mm.
producing cells in our body. And they live in clusters within the pancreas. And the pancreas has a multitude of functions, a lot of digestive
Mm-hmm.
functions. And in type 1 diabetics, our immune system starts to suppress those islet cells and prevents them from doing their job. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, in everybody and humans, we are born with all the islet cells we are going to have for life. We don't reproduce islet cells like we do skin cells, or
Okay.
the liver reproduces itself. Islet cells, you have what you're going to have. So that's why type 1 diabetics are diabetics for life, because once ours are suppressed and kind of die off, for lack of better words,
Right.
we don't have any more. We're done.
Okay. Okay. That is so interesting. And you mentioned something, yeah, and we probably won't get into too deep of this. I have another episode that I did with a doctor, and we're going to talk about all these different hormones, which I think is so fascinating because, we just think of insulin. That's the only thing the pancreas does, but there's so many different layers and all these different hormones, how they bounce off each other. But for today's purpose, beta cells. So basically we are left with none, and or the pancreas is no longer doing what it should, as far as having those beta cells too. So they play a role, they're a vital role in glucose metabolism, as they respond to changes in blood sugar by releasing insulin to help cells absorb and use glucose for energy. So, and that's the use of insulin. So the beta cells are, is it like a receptor? I guess I'm trying to get more visual with it.
They detect insulin, or they detect blood sugar levels and respond to rising insulin or rising
Oh,
glucose levels is what
okay.
they do.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they're their own little vascular system. They have I believe they have their own like little nervous system going on. Like islets, my doctor refers to them as micro organs because they're not, they sense what's going on with your blood sugar in your body, and they can release hormones to kind of bring levels up and bring levels back
Right.
down.
Accordingly. Yeah, yeah.
And so we lose that ability to regulate our blood sugars when our immune system starts to attack these clusters of cells called islet cells.
Right. Okay, so pancreatic islet cell transplant. Ooh, let's dive into this. So, what was the process for you? I guess if you want to start at the beginning, you shared how you met the doctor. That was an exciting introduction, and he was just as excited as you were. And well, tell us too. I'm going to back up too, because the FDA right now does not approve this procedure, right? That's kind of the sticky point, right?
That is the sticky point. And what's unfortunate is other countries use islet cell transplants as a form of treatment for type 1 diabetics. That's not considered clinical, or it's not, or research. So the big ones that my doctor always like, Canada does it, European countries do it, Japan does it, for type 1 diabetics, not as a standard of treatment, but as a option of
As an
treatment.
option. Right.
And unfortunately, here in the United States, the FDA refuses to approve this as a form of treatment. So the only way a person can get a pancreatic islet cell transplant is through clinical research studies. It has to be funded and done through a study.
Okay. And that's exactly where you came in. And then
Correct.
Yes. So tell us if you want to just kind of walk us through what you had to, it was probably, I'm thinking there's probably some criteria that had to be checked off, right?
Yeah.
Paperwork, all that good stuff. But yeah, so what was the process for you?
So that first conversation I had with the doctor was, right now, one of the biggest criteria for type 1 diabetics to get an islet cell transplant is they have to either have multiple severe hypoglycemic episodes, or they have to have hypoglycemic unawareness. And that second one is what I developed. I used to be what I called a walkie-talkie in the 40s. I rarely felt symptoms as my blood sugar was dropping.
Yeah.
And I would drop real quickly, so my Dexcom wouldn't catch it oftentimes.
Yeah.
And I would be completely fine. And then all of a sudden I'd lose my vision, become dizzy and fall.
Okay.
Or I'd I'd be sitting at work and I wouldn't know that my blood sugar had dropped, but other people around me would refer to how I talked
Just kind
really,
of
really
pick up on
slow
it.
or I seemed drunk. And so other people were picking up on it faster than I
Yeah.
was. So that was kind of the main criteria
Mm.
um, for me being able to participate in this research study.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Were they looking at your A1C, time and range, all those data points that we look at? Was that part of it or
they
maybe your
did.
graph? Yeah. I
They
guess they
did look
were.
at that. They checked my A1C, and I've always had a pretty decent A1C. I was always kind of in the sixes.
Okay.
I don't think they want someone who's horribly out of control, anything above 9 or 10. Think what it
Okay.
was.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lot of mixed meal glucose tolerance tests.
Oh.
So what they would have us do is I'd go into the University of Chicago and I'd spend not the day there, probably 4 or 5 hours, and they'd put an IV in me and I'd take my insulin pump off and I would drink a 60 carb boost drink and they would draw my blood periodically over the next 4 hours
Mm.
and test my blood sugar. And then they also test for something called C-peptide.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
And so in your blood, you can't really test for insulin levels, but when your
Right.
body releases insulin, it also releases C-peptide. So
Mm-hmm.
type 1 diabetics, since we're not releasing insulin, we also do not release C-peptide. So
Mm-hmm.
they did a lot of testing to prove that I did not produce C-peptide, which showed that I was truly a type 1 diabetic.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And
Yes.
that comes into play later because as my islet cells started to function, my C peptide levels would go up, and they were able to see that I was producing insulin and I was um, becoming more and more, I
Kind
don't
of
know the word.
receptive.
Yes,
Receptive?
yes.
Yeah.
Like I was in the
Yeah.
beginning, it takes a while for the transplant to work. So in the beginning, you produce smaller amounts. And then all of a sudden, when it came time for me to get off insulin, I had like these crazy high C peptide levels telling everyone that my body was making its own insulin, which was
How
really cool.
exciting. That's so exciting. It's like, wow, I'm back, right? So
hmm
I was so going into it when you were going through kind of the application process. I'll call it the application process, but um, were you 100% convinced at this point that this was something that you wanted to um, be a part of? The
A hundred,
trials?
100%. I never
Okay.
thought
No
twice about it.
hesitation. Yeah.
I did. My family was very concerned. I have to take anti-rejection meds
Mm-hmm.
because it is a transplant. It the islets come from a entire pancreas. So the
Okay.
pancreas comes from somebody who's passed away and
Mm-hmm.
has donated their organs.
Mm-hmm.
So my doctor gets the entire pancreas and he takes it to the lab. And in his lab, he does his little magic and he is able to isolate these clusters of cells. And what he does then is these clusters of cells are put into like a bag of fluid, like this little bag of fluid or a bag of plasma. And then that is then what is transplanted into me. So
Okay.
it does come from another human donor. So because of that, we have to take in anti-rejection meds. And
Right.
so that made my family nervous. And that's been
Mm-hmm.
kind of a learning experience for all of us because I was sensitive to some of the meds. So they just kind of had to titrate and move meds around so that I didn't have the negative side effects that the meds could cause.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
but I'm healthy and I'm good, and
Yeah.
the meds
Well,
weren't terrible.
so again, about a year ago is when you went through and had this done. And what was the procedure? How long did the procedure take? Do you remember how long you
The
were?
procedure took about an hour.
I'm assuming you were under anesthesia.
So not for we you go to something called the
Ah,
interventional radiology. So it's like a little OR, but they don't put you completely out to sleep. They
oh,
more give you medicine to make you twilight. So I was
okay.
in and out of sleep for it. I was awake for some parts. I was asleep for others. And so what they do is an interventional radiologist, which is a doctor who specializes in um, like ultrasound techniques and CTs
Okay.
and x-rays. They use an ultrasound, and the transplant actually goes into your liver because your liver is very vascular. It has a large blood supply. So it becomes the perfect little home for these islet cells so
Okay.
that they have a good access to your blood supply to regulate your sugars. So they put in with ultrasound, they access this big juicy vein that feeds into your liver called the portal vein. And they infuse that bag of fluids, I'm so
Mm.
sorry, the bag of islets that
Okay.
they've made, and they infuse that into my liver. And as they enter my liver, they find all these like nooks and crevices to make their home. And that
Wow.
is where they begin to live. And it takes about 3 months. And then they call graft, or they kind of nestle in and they wake up. And that's where they start.
Just kind of hanging out at home again,
Yeah.
right? That is
And
so.
I tell people I'm a proud owner of a liver that produces insulin.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is probably going to be a hot question. So once you woke up and then you went into recovery,
Mm-hmm.
what was your initial or even immediate response, blood sugar wise?
So it takes about 3 months for the cells to become fully grafted. And just part of the process and part of the procedure and part of the transplant, some of the cells die off. And when they die off,
Mm.
they release a bunch of insulin. So I was really closely monitored in the
Mm.
hospital overnight and for the next 2 days
Okay.
because there was a high risk of me becoming hypoglycemic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
actually the first time they told me I could just take my insulin pump off because of all the death of some of these cells. I didn't need my insulin pump because it was releasing all of this
Okay.
spontaneous insulin. So for about
Right.
24 hours, I didn't have to wear my pump. And then I put my pump back on, and it was just like normal. The first month was normal. I used the same amount of insulin. I lived my life. I knew it took 3 months. I wasn't
Okay.
expecting it to happen right away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then my doctor and his team, they all have access to my Dexcom so they can watch my sugar.
Oh.
Even now, I'm sure he could pull it up and be like, Hannah, what are you eating? Go back, like,
Oh, that's interesting.
watch what you're doing,
Yeah.
Hannah.
So it's
Um,
definitely a slow process, which makes
it's
sense. And
it's a
it's yeah, and it's a lot gentler on the body. I think just the transition of what your body is now
it is. And
working to do on its own. Yeah.
he was the one who'd be like, "Hey, I want you to decrease your basal rate to this amount, and I want when you bolus, I want you to use this carb ratio." And like he just slowly decreased how much insulin I was giving myself, and before I knew it, I was going from 60 carbs a day to 20 carbs a day. And I'm not sorry, not carbs, units
Carbs
of insulin. I was
units.
doing
Okay.
60 units of insulin, and then I was down to 20 units of insulin. And I remember one day I texted an ER doctor that I worked with, and I'm like, yesterday I only used 6 units of insulin. I'm like, this is crazy.
You still remember saying that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's so vivid in my mind how exciting it was to need less insulin and get closer and closer and closer to coming off insulin.
Mm.
And the day I actually came off insulin was a mistake. I work nights and I had come home and taken a shower. It was a real bad night at work. And
Mm.
I took a shower, and I always charged my insulin pump while I showered. And I just went right to bed. Like I was so
Mm.
tired and exhausted, I went right to bed. And then I woke up later that afternoon and I realized I wasn't wearing my pump. And that
Mm.
initial like, ugh,
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
And then I looked at my sugar, and I remember it was 83. And I was like, well, look at that.
Oh,
I'm like, imagine that.
interesting.
That's kind of a funny number. And I didn't tell anybody that my pump was off for a couple hours. I just kind of kept it in my purse and watched and looked. And then I was like, maybe I should tell the transplant team that this just happened. Because the
Mm-hmm.
big plan was always we were going to do it together. I was going to go in and do a mixed meal glucose tolerance test. And that was
Okay.
going to be the day that we took my insulin pump off. And they were really excited. And they're like, eat 60 carbs. And I was like,
See what
okay.
happens. Go for it. See what
Yes, and I
happens.
did. And my blood sugar, I remember it went up to 170, and I just was like in full panic mode. I'm like, I need to put my pump back on. And they're all like, no, don't do it. Stay strong. Don't do it. And I went up to
Right.
170 and I was at 170 for like a minute and then it went right back down to the 90s. And I was like, what? This is crazy.
Oh,
And
that is
so,
such a surreal moment when you're so
and
used to having to be in control and suddenly your body was doing it for you. That is,
yes,
yeah.
it was wild. And I would eat and then I would like obsess and watch my Dexcom, nervous that it
Mhm.
wasn't going to work. And I'm going to be like, oh, today's the day. Today's the day I'm going to put my pump back on. And then for
Yeah.
10 months, I got 10 months of beautiful
Yes, and we're going to talk about
insulin
that.
free.
Yeah. Well, so like you were on anti-rejection meds. Did you get to where you were just kind of um feeling more comfortable with that
Yes.
as far as
Yes.
how your body was responding? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that that we hear is well, you get off insulin but you've got to take anti-rejection meds for the rest of your
Correct.
life, but that's so
And
unique too because everybody's going to respond differently.
and I've met a handful of people from the study, and everyone's done really well on the anti-rejection meds. I honestly think that they sound a lot scarier than they really
Mhm.
are.
Yeah,
I mean, people get kidney transplants and heart transplants every day and take the
yeah,
exact same meds.
that's true.
They're much thicker people than I was, but they still function and live healthy lives
Mhm.
on these
Mhm.
meds.
Yeah.
I think I was a little bit unique in some cases just because I was real sensitive to some of the meds. So again, they had to titrate and play around with the meds,
Yeah.
but I know
Yeah,
a
like
lot of people
anything.
who did really,
Sure.
really well on the initial dosages. And then my one friend is still takes the exact same meds that they started her on because she's done so well on them.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it just goes to show you how different we all are. So that's really cool.
Mhm.
And it sounds like the team you worked with at the University of Chicago was just amazing. They were very hands-on. Did they kind of take over the role as your endo, or was your original endocrinologist still in the picture?
She was still in the picture, but they really did kind of take control, especially after my transplant. My doctor, his name's Piotr Wachowski, and Dr. Wachowski was very involved in decreasing my insulin and watching my sugar levels. And he still wanted me to follow up with my endocrinologist, but a lot of it was just to do the routine checks.
Sure,
And
sure.
I had seen her actually the day I came off insulin. She was one of the first people I told. And I remember she's like, well, what do you need from me from now on? And I'm like, I just need to
Ah,
have a relationship with somebody for when this doesn't work anymore. And I remember
yeah.
she was so cute. She told me, she's like, how about this? I'll see you every 6 months. If you're off insulin, you can bring me coffee and we'll just have a doctor's appointment. And she's like, and if you're on insulin, then we'll talk about it when that happens.
I love
And
that.
I was
Yes, to
like,
keep that
okay, all right.
relationship.
I love that. So I
Yeah.
still see her every 6 months. I am back on insulin, so she's back to managing that with me.
Okay.
But again, now that I still have partial functioning of my islet cells, so it's
Hmm.
between the two doctors
Yes, it sounds like you've got a
is
good
what I'm
team.
dealing with right now. I got two of
Yeah.
them.
So tell us about what happened just recently. It just happened over the summer, which
Correct.
so it was kind of a step back. So tell us about that.
It was. So back in April, the end of April, I ended up getting a muscle infection in my thigh,
Mm.
completely unrelated to diabetes and completely unrelated to the transplant. It's something rare. It's called necrotizing fasciitis. It's terrible.
Hmm.
Um, it was really, really hard on my body. My body really struggled for about 4 months to fight this infection. And and I think anyone's bodies would get tired
Yeah.
and pooped and I spent a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
time in the hospital and I was constantly in and out having surgeries where they were debriding my leg and trying to take pieces of infected tissue out and
Oh.
it just became too much for my little islets and so they kind of started to poop out
Oh.
and I started to lose islet cell function
Okay.
which was I was in the hospital when it started to happen because at that point I had stopped checking my sugars. They told me I didn't need to check my sugars anymore, that I was just obsessing and I didn't need to obsess over my sugars. And so I wasn't wearing a Dexcom. I wasn't checking
Okay.
my sugars. And when I was in the hospital, I was getting blood drawn every morning. And I remember around noon, one of the techs came in and they're like, "Hey, I'm here to check your sugar." And I'm like, "Oh no, we don't do that." We don't check my sugars. And then I found out later that my blood sugar was about 220 that morning.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and that was kind of the beginning of me coping with being back on insulin. I remember they
Okay.
gave me 2 units of Lantus that day, and it was the hardest injection I've ever done in my entire life. And I
Mm,
felt so selfish for being sad over 2 units of Lantus, because like how many type 1 diabetics would kill to only have to use 2 units of
right.
Lantus? And here I
Right.
was, the
Right.
beginning of the loss of my islets. And then I went from like
Right.
2 units, and a couple days later they were just increasing it. And before I knew it, I needed to put my insulin pump back on because I
Okay.
wasn't really quite controlling my sugars like I had been.
Understood. Yeah.
So
So the infection, because and correct me if I'm wrong, the anti-rejection meds do they affect your immune system,
correct.
because that's obviously what the purpose is,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want another autoimmune reaction to those beta cells. So it's kind of suppressing your immune system. So that is probably what kind of escalated that infection. In
Um,
hindsight, it's not something we can do about it now,
Possibly.
but yeah,
I mean, this infection's pretty serious for
it,
anyone who gets it.
anyone. Mm,
And so there was a portion of time for the first 3 months, I stayed on my anti-rejection meds. We didn't take me off of them, and I was getting antibiotics. And then it got real serious the beginning of June. So for a short period, they also took me off my anti-rejection meds so that my body could properly fight the infection. And that's
mhm,
also partially one of the reasons why I started to lose function of my islets.
mhm,
So
mhm,
the anti-rejection meds for a long time didn't horribly affect the infection. We were kind of keeping it at bay.
mhm.
But back in June, it was just kind of too much, and we
Gotcha.
made the decision to stop the meds for, I think it was about a week that we stopped the meds.
Gotcha. Yeah. 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 Because your overall health was obviously more important. Yeah. It's like you had to focus on what was the most important thing.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. So here we are a few months later. Here you
Mhm.
are a few months later. So what does this look like now? And can I assume that they were checking the C peptide? Is that how they determined, or they went in and did a C peptide to see if the pancreas was, or the beta cells were, was
So
there
I
any
do,
action?
as part of the study, I do frequent blood work. So they've, over the last, I joined in March of 2021. They've been checking my blood work all the
Mm,
time. A1C gets checked all the time. So they could see I was having decreased levels of C peptide. I still produce C peptide, so I still have some
okay,
function
a
in the
little
islet.
function. Hmm.
I've kind of played with my insulin pump a little, not using my insulin pump a little bit to see how much function I have. And I've kind of figured out I have enough, I make enough insulin to kind of maintain a basal rate.
Mm,
So whatever my blood sugars add, if I don't eat, my islets can
just
can
kind of keep
keep
you coasting.
that
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
They cannot keep up with when I eat. So
Okay,
if
understood.
I eat anything carby or not carby, they struggle to keep up with that. So I definitely
Mm,
have to bolus when I eat.
nice.
Um, and so I mean I have enough to keep me out of DKA,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
good. And I'm using probably around 20 to 30 units of insulin a day, which is
Okay,
still significantly less than I used to use. So I
sure,
still have
sure.
islet cell function, and we are still um, working to keep those alive. He didn't
Okay.
give up. We're not giving up on my islets. I still have some. And I think he's told a couple of the nurses that I know that he's like, "Hannah's worried, but it's fine. I'm not worried. We'll transplant Hannah again."
Oh,
So
I love that attitude. Yeah.
when I'm ready, they said they'll transplant me again. I'm not quite
Okay.
there yet, but
Okay.
they're ready when I am.
Okay. Yes. And so when you say you're ready, I know this is so fresh and new. So
Mhm.
just systematically, and the way, I mean, just the day to day and what you're having to do now, I'm sure there's an emotional attachment to this too. And what you had to go through for the surgery itself, there's a lot of levels too, or layers too. Yeah.
It was going back on insulin was like a second diagnosis for me, but
Mm,
it was significantly, I had a really hard time going back on insulin.
mm.
And then I had this giant scar on my leg, and all I could think was like, I lost my islets and now my leg is maimed, or I lost my islets and
Oh,
now I have this hole in my leg. And then I finally got a graft. I got a skin graft on my leg, and that was a big celebration because it was kind of the end of this horrible thing that happened to me.
mm-hmm.
And then September 1st was my 1 year annerversary. So just
Okay.
recently, my
Mm-hmm.
1 year anniversary of my islets, and it was a hard day for me because yes, I
Yeah.
still have functioning islets, but um, it's. I talked to one of the other girls in the islet cell program about it too, and it's hard because we feel like we failed,
Mm,
but we didn't. I am aware I didn't, but it doesn't change the fact that I still feel like I failed my islets.
yeah.
This infection was not planned. It's not
Right.
something that's ever happened to any other islet cell patient.
Yeah. It's just
It's
an
a freak of
obstacle.
nature that happened to
Yeah.
me, and
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to be here, and I got to keep my leg, and I
There you
still have
go.
some islets, and I have this amazing team that's willing to do it again when I'm
Mm-hmm.
ready.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
going back on insulin was hard, and I need a little break for a little bit to breathe again.
Understood. That makes sense. Yes. Yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. Yeah. Appreciate you sharing that. I totally get it. You know, type 1 diabetes is tough. And then, you know, this was something that, you know, obviously the average person with diabetes doesn't go through a
Mm-hmm.
transplant. So yeah, the emotions of it, you know, I continue to just think about it and envision what you were feeling and what the days, you know, just the up and down feeling. It's pretty amazing. It's really amazing. And, you know, it gives you another opportunity just to see how strong you are, just, you know, and your purpose here. And it was a bump in the road,
Was a bump in the road.
but you are still trucking. Yeah, you are still on your journey. So I love that. And yeah, you definitely have a team. It sounds like a family of people.
It is a fan.
And
We've all become
yeah,
really close, and
it's so
one of the nurses,
important.
one of the coordinators I hang out with outside of, we've gone to plays and we've gone to events and like
Mm,
little outings and all the time. Like they have
right.
become my family, and they're more
Yeah,
than just my treatment team. They're
absolutely.
really special people to me.
Nice. So is there anything looking back, would you have still have made that decision a year ago?
A
Without a
hundred
doubt?
percent.
Okay.
A hundred
Yeah.
percent.
And I had a
No,
feeling
I
you'd
have
say that.
no regrets.
Yeah. Yeah. And going forward, when you're ready, you may make that step with the support of this team to
Hmm.
get another transplant and to get those beta cells
Cooking
going
again.
again, right? Cooking again? Cooking again. I like that. So when you think, and I know you have an opportunity, probably not to mention in your workplace and within your community, but and here right now with our listeners, just to give us, you know, the story and you know, there's so many questions about what to expect, you know, how to go through the process if maybe this is a something that somebody is considering doing. So I appreciate that just to come in and just share that because there's nothing like learning from somebody that's gone through the
Hmm.
process and continues to learn, you know, just like anything in life. There's no absolutes, there's no guarantees. We have to just learn how to roll with it. And that is life with T1D, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any recommendations, advice for somebody that is listening and just might be something that they wanted to, you know, maybe take that next step?
I think they should just go for it and send an email. When I sent my email um, to my doctor, I did not think I'd get a response at all, and was just completely shocked that
Yeah.
everything was able to happen. I mean, it's worth, if it's something someone's interested in, I 110% think it's worth a try. It's worth
Yeah.
it to have a conversation. He's really good about responding to people.
Mm-hmm.
On Instagram, about a month ago, somebody from Egypt was like, "Does he transplant people from other countries?" And I was like, "I have no idea. Send him an email. Like,
I check
let
in
me
with
give
them,
you
right?
let me send you
Right.
his email and you talk to him." And he did. Like it's worth trying because it's such a life-changing experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was told my islets would go for another 10, 15 years if I didn't get this
The
infection.
infection.
And
Okay.
so, I mean, that's a long time.
It
That's
sure
those are
is. It
that's
sure is.
10 to 15 years of preventing complications
There you go.
and
Yeah.
preserving your kidneys and preserving your heart and your
Yeah.
brain and the
Yeah.
vessels in your body. So,
Yeah, it really is looking at the pros and cons, because everybody would walk into this decision. Anybody with I'm living with type 1 for 41 years now. And this is something that I'm considering. It's definitely something I'm interested in learning more about. But we each uniquely, we have to just look at the pros and cons, right? I think it's where we are with our current care, how confident we are, how there's just so many. It's like the people that I help and I coach, everybody's going through a different kind of having a different experience living with type 1. And I'm not going to say it's easier for some people or harder. It's just a different challenge. So it's such a unique decision to make if this is something that is an obvious choice for you. So just I come in how brave you are. I don't know that I would do it. I don't know. I'm still scratching my head, but it's exciting to know more about.
I get that response a lot
Yeah.
from people. They're like, I wish I was brave enough to try it, or I wish. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a big commitment, a huge commitment that I jumped right into, and it's not for everybody. I am fully
Yeah.
aware that this is not for everybody.
Yeah.
But it was a really cool thing, and
Yeah.
again, like I've met a handful of the other participants in the study, and I don't think I've met one single person who has regretted doing it.
Regretted. Right.
Everyone
Understood.
loves our team, loves our doctor, and everyone's really grateful for their islets and whatever experience that they have had with their
Yeah.
transplants.
Yeah. And that goes back to mindset too. I think that's so, because we can make any surgery journey experience like that, and we can look at it with a negative tone. But it sounds to me like everybody that has had the beta cell transplant came in with a very hope filled, which is really kind of the mission of this podcast, is to have that mindset that anything is possible, that you will be provided for, that you can trust in the system and the team that's going to help you. So it's just a really good example of that. I appreciate that. Now I'm gonna ask kind of an off question, because maybe there's some people wondering, because you were in a trial. So this was my goodness, what's the term I'm thinking of? A kind of like a clinical trial. So,
Correct.
so was there a cost for you?
There was not.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I assumed. Yeah, just based on the parameters of it and the reason
Everything
they were
was
doing
fully covered by the study.
it.
Now, the research aspect of what I did was the doctor was trying to create a better environment for the islet cells rather than the liver. So they're doing research on finding new ways to transplant the islets. So I did receive 2 prior transplants before the one that went into the liver. And those were not successful. I don't know that they were expecting them to be successful, but that was all part of the research that I participated in.
Okay.
And then once I completed that aspect of the study, they were then able to do the big transplant and the one they know that works and the one that they're doing all across the world that's been helping diabetics.
Understood. Yeah, which it makes sense, because the whole point is to get people like you to be able to kind of come in as testers, basically,
Correct.
kind of like beta testers. I like that term. Yeah, so come in, but obviously it's done in a very safe and supported environment. So it's not done in any other term or focus. So, well, really, really cool. So what is your best days? Do you feel like your best days are behind you or ahead of you?
No, they're ahead of me.
I love it.
I just overcome what did you call it earlier? A hump, or it was
A bump in
a
the
bump in
road,
the
right?
road. I just
Yes.
overcame a bump in the road, and we're gonna get back on track soon. I got a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of traveling I need to do, and then I think after my traveling, I'm gonna be
You ready to go for it again? Yeah.
ready to go for it again.
Nice. We'll definitely keep in touch. So we've got you in our radar, as part of this show, and we definitely want you to come back and share more. So share with me too, because I know a big part of what you do personally is to advocate and to spread awareness about this, about this transplant. So tell us about how we can, what we can do, how we can connect, how we can support it, how we can get with Congress and make the, kind of push the FDA to make this more readily available.
So my doctor has been he's been working with senators, and he's been fighting with the FDA to push them to accept islet cell transplants as a treatment for type 1 diabetics. And they've given a lot of pushback. And so he's created the Islets for US Collaborative, which you can go to, it's isletsforus.org. And it's about this Islet Act, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for butchering what it's about. But basically,
That's okay.
To summarize it, it is an act that he wants to go forth through Congress that allows transplant centers to procure and isolate their own islets so that they can transplant them into type 1 diabetics without the heavy FDA restrictions that force people to do it through clinical trials. So he's trying to open this up for the United States so that it can be done freely without all of these restrictions. So one of the big things that I've been doing is I've been trying to teach people about islets, because first of all, I don't think the general public, let alone half the diabetics, know that islet cell transplants exist, and that's even because I was an educated ER nurse, and I had no idea up until 3 years ago that people could get islet cell transplants. I knew pancreatic transplants existed, but islets are way less invasive than a giant abdominal surgery that a pancreas transplant would be.
True.
And so
that's true.
And so one of the big things that I'm doing is I just want people to know that they exist. It's not for everybody, but people should have the opportunity to know about them.
They should have the opportunity to know about them. Exactly. Yes.
So what people can do is they can email their senators and ask their senators to support the Islet Act, which I myself like to email the Illinois senators weekly, reminding them that the Islet Act is a thing, and
you got to keep in their inbox, right?
Yeah. And they're probably like, oh, this Hannah girl again's email.
Yeah, this Hannah girl again. Yeah. I love it.
And then also he has on his website, he has a link for all his Islet Act supporters. And so if someone wants just to personally support, they can support it's isletact@gmail.com, and they can just say, I, Hannah Gilkey from Illinois, support the Islet Act. And you'll just be added to this list that is growing of people who believe in islets and think that islets are beneficial to type 1 diabetics.
Yeah. And I think that, the biggest thing that you mentioned is the choice. It's the opportunity. It's awareness. Yeah. And even to get this information into our endo offices, the endocrinology offices and within the healthcare system. Yeah. And that's another whole topic, because I've got my own reasons why they're not. I think there's a lot more money in diabetes, and, that's just, that's just the conspiracy theory, but that's just kind of how I think a lot of people may respond to that. But, there's power in people speaking up, insisting, and getting this word out. And we're going to link all of what you just mentioned here in the show notes to make it really easy for people to click and reach out and to get part of this movement, and to learn more too. And if there's a way that we can connect even with the University of Chicago medicine, And we can even have an access if people want to really learn more about maybe if this is something that they can do for themselves and take this step. So, okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited about your days ahead. You've been a joy to talk with. Yeah. And it is all about being, to stay positive and to see, the relationships that, that you built, being able to come here and talk to our listeners and to share your story and to inspire. I think we all need to inspire and to be inspired. And it's just it's just so nice to be part of that, and such a joy to have you here. And we congratulate you. Yes. And we know that and stay in touch. Yeah, we'll definitely have you back next time, whenever you're ready, and to give us an update. We'll learn more about yeah, that's exciting. Yeah. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I think that was it.
Okay.
I talked your ear off about my islets.
I love it. I've never talked about islets so much. And I love it. It's now part of my vocabulary, and it needs to be. It needs to be. It needs to be for us living with type 1. So thanks again for the information and to come in here and share your story, because I know that, it can be difficult and it can be a challenge, but appreciate you. Really appreciate you.
Been an honor.
Yes. Well, Hannah, thanks again. And like I mentioned, all this information that she shared and a way to reach and stay connected with this Islet Act, we'll get that going. And again, there's so much power in numbers. So let's get that happening and let's learn more. And again, thanks again. And we will be back in here next week. Thanks for listening. And we hope this conversation and this topic helped you. And please reach out to Hannah. And we will also link your Instagram handle, because I know that you share a lot of information on there. So look for that in the show notes here to connect with Hannah. And your last name is Gilkey. So Hannah Gilkey. And we will link all that here to make it easy. And so we can stay connected. The diabetes community needs to stay connected. I don't think we have any trouble doing that. We are a tight group. Okay. Well, thanks everybody, and enjoy your week and stay hope-filled. Until next time, see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review right here on iTunes. And you're invited to connect with our Type 1 and Midlife community on the free Honey Health app. Here we discuss the podcast topics in a group chat, a chance for you to ask questions and take action on what we share here on the show. You can find the app link to download for free right here in the show notes. And for free resources, you can visit me at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com. And your support means so much. Thank you.